Ja, guten Morgen. I will switch into English immediately and welcome everybody to today's lecture of the series Cultures of Images in the Digital Era, Practices, Aesthetics, Genres. I'm delighted to welcome my guest, Michael Richardson, my dear colleague and friend. Good evening, Michael. It's already pretty late in Sydney, so thank you very much for making this possible and being with us today. It's with great pleasure that we welcome you in this forum. I also want to thank the Schaufler Lab at TU Dresden, which is co-hosting Michael's lecture today, and I'm very happy about this cooperation and welcome the team of Schaufler Lab and also the fellows. Before I will introduce Michael, let me quickly repeat some technical details. So please leave your cameras and microphones switched off during the lecture. After Michael's presentation, you have the possibility to discuss with him and I will moderate. You can ask your question by typing your question in the chat, or you can enter a plus sign in the chat and then ask in person. Please feel free to pose your questions in English or in German. If you post them in German, I will try to translate into English. Please be also aware that we record the lecture. So now I'm very honored to introduce Michael Richardson. Michael is a senior research fellow at the School of the Arts and Media at the University of New South Wales in Sydney. He's a prolific academic in the field of culture and media studies and has been named as a top 5 humanities early career researcher by ABC News Australia in July this year. His research crosses disciplinary boundaries and investigates literature, visual culture, art, and media technologies, addressing the intersection of affective dynamics, power relations, and practices of witnessing. I first came across his work when I co-organized a conference on image testimonies and witnessing in times of social media. I discovered his outstanding book, Gestures of Testimony, Torture, Trauma, and Affect in Literature, published with Bloomsbury in 2016. And that was so important for us because it connected witnessing and affect, a very innovative approach and a real intervention in witnessing theory. So we had invited him for this conference in Berlin into the Collaborative Research Center Affective Societies at Freie Universität Berlin. And that was the beginning of a very fruitful cooperation. And we have worked on several joint projects since then, which has been a great pleasure and inspiration for me. At the moment, we are publishing a special issue with Parallax on what we call affective witnessing. After having worked on political violence, torture, and trauma, Michael now more focuses on technological environments and media culture, including drone warfare, surveillance, and algorithms. He's currently working on a major project on drone witnessing in war and culture, funded for 2 years by a very prestigious Australian Research Council Discovery Early Career Research Award. Very long title. Michael published extensively. I referred already to his book, Gestures of Testimony. This book won the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences Dean Research Award for the best monograph by an early career researcher. He's also the co-editor of Traumatic Affect, which came out in 2013, and is the author of numerous articles in leading journals like Continuum, Cultural Studies, Environmental Humanities, and others. I will only mention 3 very recent articles that relate to the topic of today's lecture. That is, the first one is Drone Capitalism, published in Transformations 2018. Then Drone Cultures, Encounters with Everyday Militarism in Continuum, Journal of Media and Cultural Studies, which is really hot off the press. 2020, and these two are online for the students on Opal, our teaching platform. And the third one is an upcoming article entitled Witnessing the Anthropocene, Affect and the Problem of Scale, that will be published in early next year in the special issue of Parallax that I already mentioned. I also highly recommend that you check out the activities of Media Futures Hub that Michael is a founding member of. That is a collection of scholars at the University of New South Wales carrying out cutting-edge research on justice, media, and emerging technologies. And you can find Michael's Drone Future seminar series on YouTube online. And I also want to mention a symposium that is starting tomorrow on drone cultures. So there is a lot of exciting stuff going on. A very warm welcome again, Michael. We are very much looking forward to your presentation on drone images.
Thank you so much, Kerstin, for that kind introduction. I don't think I've ever had such a fulsome and generous accounting of my work. So thank you very much. And I'll just say that I would not be thinking with images or perhaps even with drones at all if it wasn't for your invitation to Berlin and your friendship and insight over the last several years. It's been an absolute pleasure of my career as well. So thank you. And thank you as well to TU Dresden and to the Schaufler Lab and to the others who've made this event possible, including Marie, who did so much work in the background. And thank you all for joining us today. So for the last several years, I have been researching, thinking, and writing about drones and their impact on how we witness the world. But I want to use Kerstin's invitation today to do something slightly different. What you'll hear is almost entirely new. It's an effort to develop a kind of critical typology of drone images. And as you've been hearing about so many different image cultures in this lecture series, I'm sure you'll have lots of feedback to offer when we come to the Q&A. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing the flaws in the way I'm thinking. I'll just share my screen and then we'll get into things properly. Have you guys got those slides fine?
Yes, thanks. Fine.
Great. So in Australia, we begin formal gatherings with an acknowledgement of country that recognises the settler colonial history and its enduring legacies for the traditional owners of this place. So this evening, I want to acknowledge the Bidjigal people on whose country I live and work, and I offer my respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to any First Nations people who are tuning into this call today. Sovereignty was never ceded to these lands, and the struggle for justice continues, even as its form changes. When talking about drones and drone images, issues of justice and sovereignty are never far away, particularly when drones are so often used for surveillance and violence in war and policing. We might even trace a history of drones through techniques of mapping, surveying, and enclosing land, of categorizing and separating peoples. The first aerial surveys were military, but also colonial, in Scotland and not long after in Palestine. Early military drones were tested in the Pacific, part of the post-war expansion of American empire. But those histories are ably illustrated elsewhere, particularly in the writings of Karen Kaplan and Kay Chandler. Today, I want to tell a different story about drone images, one that begins much closer to home. In October this year, Ring, the security device company owned by Amazon, announced the Ring Always Home Cam, a miniature drone with a docking station that would connect up with the rest of the Ring suite of products. The announcement occasioned exactly the kind of outrage you'd expect, and rightly so. Promises of end-to-end encryption don't carry much weight when Ring has already been caught allowing police access to its doorbell cameras without alerting their users. But what interests me about this device is what it suggests about drone images. An image of the drone as a domestic companion, but also of securitized interiors, as aesthetic object and surveillance device, as networked into larger infrastructures of capital and control, as not simply technical, but cultural and political. It's an image of the drone that hovers between visibility and invisibility, but that is never static, always evolving. And it presents us an image of what the drone sees: aerial, yet intimate; autonomous, yet under command; an image of security, of the policing of borders between inside and out. It shows us how drones have spread from war to wedding photography, from the hands of enthusiasts to those of consumers, from niche applications to the transformation of multiple industries, from the outside of imperial frontiers and state borders and agribusiness to the interior of the home. If we are to make sense of drone images, then we need to reckon with this breadth, this complexity. Otherwise, our image of the drone will be unclear. It will conceal more than it reveals. And the uncritical, unremarked entrenchment of drone images in visual culture brings with it a political danger too, a normalizing of aerial surveillance. So what does it mean to even conceive of drone images as a collective if the technology itself occupies so many different domains? To start with, we need to attend briefly to the drone itself. So drone is the colloquial term for a remotely piloted aerial vehicle, or more properly, a remotely piloted aerial system. At a minimum, the vehicle requires a controller, network, and signal to operate. Think of the now widely available hobby drones that form a network with a smartphone as a controller and use Wi-Fi as its communication signal. And that's much like the one you're seeing on the screen right now. But the drone is also a military aircraft, where it is far more likely to be of the fixed wing variety than those consumer-style quadcopters. The Predator and Reaper drone operations, more commonly associated with drone warfare, are more complex than home drones too, employing what's called a remote split system, in which the drone is launched from one location before control is handed off via satellite link to an operations crew, typically located in the continental United States, at least in the context of US drone warfare. But what makes the drone powerful is that it is not just a vehicle. It is a remotely piloted remote sensor. But even that account is too narrow, because drones are aggregations of human and non-human agents. Karen Kaplan calls them hybrid machines that make their worlds, materiality, and elementality as complex assemblages that gather and produce people, objects, discourses, information, terrains, atmospheres, and in ways we must make more complicated, images. Drone vision is by now a familiar part of visual culture. The aerial view from above, rendered digital and in full motion video, equally recognizable in optical and thermal modes. Like the drone itself, drone vision is more than its image, and images themselves are, as W.J.T. Mitchell tells us, always more than visual. Much of the literature on drones and visual culture rightly focuses on war and militarism. In his widely read article, From a View to Kill, the geographer Derek Gregory situates the technical vision of the drone within the scopic regime of drone warfare, which is a term he borrows from Martin Jay to account for the material, discursive, technical, and practical elements that shape, define, and delimit what the drone sees. Aerial and orbital perspectives of drones and satellites are new phenomena in media representations of conflict, dating back to Operation Desert Storm in 1991 in the case of satellites, and to the late 90s, and then much more so the late 2000s in the case of drones. With the arrival of the war on terror, Lisa Parks shows how media coverage increasingly, quote, made vertical space intelligible to global publics in new ways and powerfully revealed what is at stake in being able to control the vertical field. Media coverage of the invasions of Afghanistan and then Iraq helped make the aerial view familiar, training publics to recognize and decode new ways of seeing. Leaking into visual culture, drone vision invited publics to see the drone war through the very apparatus that prosecuted it. And in doing so, writes Roger Stahl, framed out those populations who must live and die under this new regime of aerial occupation. This framing out is a feature, not a bug. Frames of war, as we know from Judith Butler, always exclude certain lives, making them vulnerable, invisible, and for distant publics safe and secure in the United States or Australia or Germany, making their lives ungrievable. An account of drone images must reckon with this dynamic, but it also must do more. While the vestiges of militarism can't be readily extricated from drones or their images, drones now occupy far more diverse domains of human and non-human activity than war alone. Rather than dwelling with the specificities of drone vision, which is a fascinating and crucial topic that I just might write a book about sometime soon, I want to focus more closely today on drone images. And by drone images, I mean that I'm interested in images produced by drones, like the one we're seeing here, and images of drones, which might include the iconography of the drone, its shape and shadow. But I'm also interested in the figure of the drone itself, its form as a cultural image of a particular set of logics, discourses, and affects that are enacted through a distinctive technology of perception. In this regard, one image is particularly instructive. Frequently reproduced on television broadcasts and newspapers, at least until everybody knew better, this image of a Reaper drone launching a Hellfire missile is a fake, photoshopped by an enthusiast who wanted to depict the drone actually launching a Hellfire missile. The Reaper was initially modeled in 3D modeling software and then composited with an image of the Hellfire missile in Photoshop. This simulated image signals a desire, I think, to make visible what cannot be seen or rarely seen. But it also speaks to the cultural image of the weaponized drone. Here, the simulacra exceeds the real, sometimes in rather dramatic ways. But the fake Reaper also leads us into some more specific claims about drone images. So I want to outline a few points here about the kind of constitution of drone images. And I'll try to move quite quickly through them because I then want to get into exploring some different forms of drone image. There are a few things we can say about the drone image. The first is that it is machinic. And by that I mean it is a variety of machine vision. It is never analog, or at least not in its contemporary form. Very early drones in the 1930s had analog cameras, but that technology is long since passed. That means that the drone image is always a digital image, and it is always an image translated into an optical environment that is made sensible for us as human viewers. The drone is also a motile technology, and its images are motile as a result. By motile, I mean that it moves under its own power, and it is capable of moving in multiple directions. Drone images also carry with them a certain degree of autonomy. While most drone vehicles are not actually autonomous themselves, or not entirely autonomous, they contain a tendency towards autonomy. And the drone image will often capture things autonomously as a result of the way it operates. Drone images, because of their motility and their autonomy, are also images of mobility. They're images made possible by the mobility of the drone as a remotely piloted remote sensor. And mobility here and motility are very closely related, of course. Drone images are also elemental, which is to say they are always situated in the elements. And the specific element that I'll be most addressing through this talk is the air. Drones make the air accessible to us as a site for vision in a way that to a degree that other technologies in the past have not done. But drones are also increasingly underwater, underground, and probably in the not too distant future inside our bodies. The image the drone produces is also always remote. That is, it is remote from a viewing subject, a viewing human subject. We might say then that one of the qualities of the drone image is that it is prosthetic. It extends our perception into places that it would otherwise not have access. The drone is not alone in this, of course. There are many technologies that do it, from our smartphones to CCTV cameras and so on. But the drone, I would argue, brings that prosthetic capacity into a new, to a new height, so to speak. Drone images are also typically time-based. So the still images, and you will mostly see still images during this talk, the still images of the drone are not the kind of natural image of the drone. The natural image of the drone is the time-based moving image, of which the still image is far more often a slice. And that's why I think the kind of the drone vision that we are so used to is moving vision. So all this tells us that drones are composed of lots of things. They're multitudes in a way, dependent on networks, full of unruly mobility and cyborg uncanniness. They possess a gritty and a kind of far-reaching materiality. They kill, but they also let live, and sometimes they even save. As Kaplan asks, then, how do we situate something as discrete as the image in relation to such a phenomenon? One answer is that we need to situate the drone image within its material, discursive, affective, and historical context. This is an important task, and one that Kaplan and Kate Chandler, Jen Schnepf, and many others working on drone images and drone technologies are doing in different ways. In this talk, I want to attend to the image, but also suggest some ways we might think about drone images that do not foreclose or exclude those necessary situated dimensions of the affective, the discursive, the historical, and so on. So I want to propose a kind of conceptual typology of drone images. A word of caution on this, though. My aim is not to produce a genre taxonomy, divvying up drone images into categories such as the activist or military or cinematic image. So what I'm proposing is not a set of categories, but rather what I'm calling a conceptual typology, which is, for me, a means of undertaking critical analysis of drone images. And in part, my desire to do this tonight flows from an increasing need in my own work to be able to talk about different forms and different dynamics of drone images in different contexts. So by this, I mean that the typology I'm going to set out does not produce either or logics. A given drone image does not have to sit in either the aesthetic category or the material. Rather, drone images will be differently grasped and analysed through the conceptual lenses afforded by thinking of it as, say, aesthetic or as material, or perhaps as both. So the first typology that I want to suggest is the informational. Most images produced by drones are neither aesthetic nor social. They're functional images existing for the purposes of representing and communicating information. In war, this is particularly the case. Drones in war are actually more often used for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, so watching in support of other operations, rather than for lethal operations. So the informational content that they produced exists to be decoded and put to use by by others. But it is important that it contains that information and the information is decodable. We might think too of coastal monitoring drones that hover above beach areas looking for sharks. On the screen here, it's a bit fuzzy, but you can see two swimmers on one side and the shadowy outline of a shark on the other side of the image. This is an image that from the Coastal Watch drone program here on the east coast of Australia. So these types of monitoring operations do produce these kind of incredible images like this one, and videos that go with them of very near misses from swimmers and surfers with sharks. And sometimes those go viral and so on. But it's not the principal quality of these kinds of images, or the principal purpose is not that they go viral or have a particular kind of aesthetic effect, but rather that they produce a certain kind of information. We could think in a similar way of images like this one, which is of monitoring open cut mining and forest clearing in Peru, or of archaeological images like this one, which are increasingly being used to show the aerial view of archaeological sites. And as we'll see in a little bit, when equipped with different kinds of sensors to even get in under the ground. So I'm not making a large claim here. I'm just saying that there are, we might think of these as a kind of very prosaic form of drone image, that their intention or their need is to convey information. We could think of more prosaic images of the drone in this regard too, like schematics or instruction manuals and so on. Such images are meant to convey information about the drone, but not to engage in any kind of commentary or engage critically with them. So the informational dimension of drone imagery is also in evidence in the image that we might see on a drone control screen, in contrast to the image that might be recorded or downloaded from the drone itself. But I think rather than thinking about those images as informational, we need to apply them to their own kind of typology. And here I want to borrow the term operative image to talk about a certain form of drone image. In the operative image, the image is framed by navigational and diagnostic information for the purpose of piloting, or in a military context, monitoring sensor information and undertaking legal or operational oversight. But it might be other things too. On the control screen, the informational content of both drone vision and its functional overlay combine to generate information about the drone and the conditions and objects of its perception. The term operative image, as I'm sure many of you know, comes from Haroon Faruqi, who said that, quote, operative images are images that do not represent an object, but rather a part of an operation. So here, the informational veers into the operative. When the drone image functions for the purpose of navigation, say, it works its way into this operational space. This operative dimension of drones is fundamental to their utility. Even the small selfie drone that I own is layered over with operative controls that intersect with or make possible a range of tracking and targeting functions. But drone images can be much more operative, particularly if we consider the image before it is resolved into pixels on the screen and when it exists as computer vision code. So for example, in the gesture control of small drones such as this one, the drone sees through its machine vision capacities the gesture and transforms this into command. What the drone sees is actually never given to us as something that we might engage with, and instead exists purely in the operative space of the drone itself. A similar version, a much more menacing version, can be found in the growing number of drone technologies for military and policing applications that are able to identify, lock onto, and track targets through a geographic space. This operative capacity, this capacity to produce images that are only for its own utility in undertaking a secondary function, this operative capacity of drone images is crucial to their potential in war and agriculture as autonomous entities. Similarly, we might think of multispectral imaging, whether it is different kinds of thermographic imaging or ground penetrating radar, which is what you're seeing here. This is the results of ground penetrating radar sensor attached to a drone. Now, images like this one might be thought very closely in relation to what I'm calling the datalogical image. So just as the informational bleeds into the operative, so too the operative and informational are closely connected with the datalogical. In the datalogical, the orientation of the drone image is more towards the future. As Jussi Parikka and Abelardo Gil Fournier write, images run ahead of their own time as future producing events when we think about images in the context of data and machine learning processes. And this is a crucial area that drone images are connecting with more and more. So the most notorious example of this was Project Maven. Project Maven is a Pentagon program to apply algorithmic principles to warfare, and in particular to apply machine learning techniques to image and video analysis. It became a little notorious because of some public outrage inside Google, and then public outrage afterwards once it became public that Google was working on this project with the US Department of Defense. So the datalogical image, the image as data, the image defined by data, is the drone image in its legibility to automated image processing and analysis, principally through machine learning systems. We can think of the datalogical as characterizing the drone image across multiple layers. First, via metadata, which is always attached to drone imagery, of course, GPS, information, timestamps, and so on. But we can also think about the datalogical image in the context of things like training data sets. So as many of you know, I'm sure, in both military and in industrial contexts, machine learning systems require large numbers of images in order to be trained upon. So if you're trying to teach a drone system how to do image analysis of aerial footage, you need large-scale image sets in order to train the machine learning algorithms and make those systems function. And this is an example of annotated images, most likely annotated by workers at Mechanical Turk or another digital pieceworking platform. Annotated images that can be used for machine learning training. So after the training, though, comes a third potential application for the datalogical image, which is the image subjected to machine learning systems. Here, in those machine learning systems, the representational content of the image, which matters within an informational typology that might be legible to us, gives way to how edges and elements within the arrangement of pixels relate to one another across huge sets of images. The content itself as content with meaningful signification outside the machine learning system is utterly secondary. In fact, to the machine learning system, it is completely irrelevant. What matters is the image as data. On top of this, we could think of post-processing constructs where images, visualizations are produced from analysis gleaned from sensor data. So moving from the datalogical, we arrive at the interfacial. So closely connected to the operative, the datalogical, and the informational, the interfacial describes the drone image as interface. Now, one version of this type of image might simply be images of the drone war interface. This is a picture of a ground control station, for example, which is operated by the US military. And this sort of gives us a picture of what it is like, or what it was like. The systems look a bit different now, to operate a drone. Now, there are, in the most basic sense, we might consider these types of things to be interfacial images, but many of the operative images I just described are operative precisely because they are interfaces. So interfacial images are typically shaped by the affordances of the navigational component of the remote control system. On the selfie drone and other small consumer systems, the smartphone enables a haptic screen interface as well as a more traditional remote control system. On other platforms, the interfacial image might be delivered in first-person view through goggles, like those for virtual reality. Yet the emergence of militarized drone platforms that combine real-time video with object recognition software also reveal how the drone image can be interfacial in the strongest sense. The image itself as manipulable, as an interface into different modes of analysis of space and across time. So, designed to be attached as a sensor payload to a range of high-altitude American military drones, the Autonomous Real-Time Ground Ubiquitous Surveillance Imaging System, or ARGUS-IS, combined 368 overlapping high-definition sensors into the equivalent of a 1.8 billion pixel camera to provide high-resolution, full-motion video of up to 10 square miles at a ground resolution of 6 inches per pixel from an altitude of 20,000 feet. That's a lot of numbers, but all of which is to say that this technology promised to provide an aerial view at high definition of multiple city blocks all simultaneously. As you'll see in this video demonstration, analysts could create video windows, track vehicles, generate 3D models, and access locations, moving backward and forward in time through geotagged archives to compare prior activities and track environmental change. The ARGUS-IS stitched images into an interface, an operative environment that enabled users to bend temporalities, delve deeper into specific sites, and monitor battlefields in minute detail. This is a kind of stunning technology if it worked. And unfortunately, or I suppose actually probably fortunately for the world, the ARGUS-IS system never really worked. But nevertheless, it tells us what the desire for the drone image is within a military sphere. And it tells us something about how the witnessing of war might begin to transform through these types of interfacial drone systems. But drone images are also material, often in intensely affecting ways. There is the materiality of the drone itself, its uncanniness, its alien quality, its menace, perhaps. Although clearly this shot was taken not out of a sense of the drone's menace, but a sense of wonder at its force. The photojournalism of Noor Bahram insists on the material and corporeal effects of drone violence, bearing witness to drone strikes throughout Waziristan on the Pakistani border with Afghanistan. Haunted faces of survivors, shattered bodies of victims, broken homes, and fragments of Hellfire missile. That's what the kids are holding in their hands, small pieces of missile. The people and objects documented by Bahram refuse to go unseen. Survivors stand in the ruins of their homes, cracked metal from the shaft of a Hellfire held in their hands, like the weight of it might break them all over again. These images propose very different material relations between the technical apparatus and bodies on the ground than what we just saw with the ARGUS-IS system. The collaborative artwork, Not a Bug Splat, takes these images of Bahram's for all of their materiality and attempts to make them material in a new way for drone pilots. So what you're looking at here is a huge blown up print of the child from the image before, which was laid out on a field in Waziristan. And the idea was that it was large enough so that someone flying a surveilling drone high overhead would have no choice but to confront the individuality of this child whose home was destroyed by drone and stare back find their eyes staring back up at them at a scale that was legible from 5,000, 10,000 feet or even higher. In stark contrast, drone strike images recorded from the ground control station present a very different materiality. On the screen, people are blurred. They're white bursts of death. But the material image we are given is of a kind of traumatized environment. Materiality is at work differently again in the paintings of Catherine Brimblecombe Fox, an Australian artist. Gestural, analog and corporeal, her paintings produce a physical, textured object with no reliance on network technologies for its existence. An image of the digital without aid of the digital. An attempt to document the drone without ever entering the technical space of the drone at all. A very different form of material image of the drone is of the drone crash. Images like this one of a crashed military drone have become prized propaganda images for insurgencies. And as Lisa Parks writes, these images highlight drone materialities, reminding viewers that unmanned and autonomous technologies are still subject to the laws of gravity, software glitches, and bad weather, and they still have enemies. Drone crash imagery that comes from the camera of the drone itself produces this materiality in a more intensive, embodied way. The image materializes drone failure rather than simply representing it. With roots in the Greek aesthesis, aesthetics denotes not only art, but situated embodiment. New technologies have not only transformed this relationship, they have catalyzed new ways of making and experiencing war and of conceiving subjectivity and subjecthood as well. The aesthetics of drone images point to the registering of experience in and through the image. Aesthetics cannot account for visual arts and culture, can account for visual arts and culture, but also the body and its relationship to the material environment, and as the foundation for how we understand politics and what makes politics possible. A question with increasing urgency, given the way drones erode boundaries between the military and the domestic, and the way drones work to obscure the bodies of conflict and the bodies of policing. So, drone image aesthetics, flattened, loitering, lacking depth of field, presented in high definition, and with this uncanny vantage, have become familiar to us, particularly through images such as what you're looking at now, footage of New York City during lockdown, where so much is where the streets are so emptied of traffic, and yet there are still people, of course, moving through. This kind of flattened aesthetic of the drone is also present on platforms such as Dronestagram, which is like an Instagram for drones, but with a far less effective social component. But it points to a kind of amateur enthusiasm for drone aesthetics, as do the emergence of drone film festivals. But imaging the drone can involve other kinds of aesthetic strategies rather than just drone camera footage. The art of the Pakistani-American artist Marwish Chishti combines traditional techniques with the iconography and outlines of different kinds of drones to bring this obscure object to a kind of visibility and to take ownership of it within a cultural space that otherwise experiences it as an object of violence. The Iraqi artist Wafa Bilal has approached imaging the drone through tattooing drone strikes onto his own body. In a series of works, Scott Patrick Weiner has worked with presenting the materiality of the drone through different kinds of playful forms. The Australian artist Baden Palethorpe has brought the drone into the digital space and rendered these mirror-like these mirror-surfaced drones as ways of trying to confront the desire of the drone to be invisible. And we can think too of images, of course, of the drone itself, which show us the aesthetics of the drone as an object. In particular, I find these predator drones, these early model lethal drones, to have a particularly sort of strange, uncertain and spindly aesthetic. They feel on the verge of breaking all the time, and indeed they actually are. But militarized drones are not simply those large vehicles. They can be much more embodied. And I love this picture of a soldier launching a Raven drone, precisely because it shows this intentional relationship between the body and the drone. And it is presented to us as an aesthetic engagement, this perfectly composed image. Lately, the aesthetic of early consumer drones, that DIY aesthetic, has given way to a sleek Silicon Valley aesthetic, more familiar to us perhaps from Apple products than from aerial vehicles. The artist and geographer Trevor Paglen has, in his work, sort of maps through this aesthetic engagement with the drone to explore the different ways we might attempt to make it visible. This is a shot from an early work of his called Drone Vision from 2010, which brought the visual regime, a visual aesthetic of the militarized drone into the space of the gallery. He's also exhibited work that shows the unit patches of various drone units within the US military as a way of making the culture of those units visible. And in a series of famous works, very beautiful photographs of the sky, Paglen has documented the near invisibility of the drone. If drone images share any kind of trajectory, and I'm coming towards the end here, it would be towards dissolution into the visual field of the domains in which they work, a kind of becoming imperceptible from other means of visual world making, even if at times they assert their presence through the interface or through their materiality. Whenever you watch TV now, you probably see, for example, tracking shots shot by drone, but it is increasingly unremarkable. As Nicholas Mwezoff argues, the drone epitomizes the new moment in visual culture. It is dissolving into the visual field. Drone imagery on television, on social media, drones on the news, in daily life, in real estate advertising. And yet recently, the Pentagon announced that it would no longer purchase new Reaper drones. Its iconic shape would join that of the Predator in being phased out of active operations. So a critical question, I think, and one for which I don't yet have an answer, is what are we to make of this fragmentation and dissolution of images of the drone and images made by the drone? What are we to make of the withdrawal of the most iconic shape of the drone away from active operations? Now, at this point, you may be thinking that the typology I have laid out is not unique to the drone, and I would largely agree with you. One of the things I think we need to do, actually, is stop fetishizing the drone as a uniquely transformative technology of perception. In so many ways, the drone is not new at all, and treating it as such weakens our analysis and loosens the grasp of critique. Drone images intersect with many other image forms considered already in this series, from the screenshot of the control interface to the selfie taken by drone, called the droney. And this one's for Kerstin, the reaction image, exemplified here in the famous photograph of President Obama watching the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. Images like this, though, remind us that the drone is often associated with power. And in thinking about the drone image and the drone itself, we need to think about the presence of power in and around these images. So if digital media are, as Paul Frosch claims, world-making, what are the worlds made by drone images? They're images of power, But there are also images of life, of death, of the human and of the non-human. And I think there are also images of witnessing, images of activism, and images of politics. The question then might be, how do we begin to bring the images of the drone that become so domestic, so familiar, so sleekly aesthetic, that the aerial space of the drone moves from external atmospheres to the internal atmospheres of our homes? How do we hold on to the necessary politics of the drone image when faced with the ring drone? So thank you very much. That's it.